Welcome to another episode of Com Speak. In this episode, we have with us a guest that most of you in the world of public relations are familiar with. We have with us Mr. Dilip Cherian. Dilip Cherian is the founder of Perfect Relations and a pioneer in the Indian PR consulting world. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Cherian.
Thank you, Amit. A real pleasure to be here, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to chat with you, and through you to other people in the world of PR. Thank you.
Appreciate that. As we do with all our guests, we take them back many years into the origins of their starting point in the world of work. In your case, you started as a media man, as a journalist, much before you began to consult people for public relations. Tell us about how that all started many years ago.
Um, Actually, my early career, well before I got into media, was in government. I started out being an economic consultant to something which in those years was called the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices, which is now succeeded by something called the Tariff Commission. Um,
Okay.
and The story of how I got in from after my college into being a consultant to the government is actually quite fascinating, and you brought my memory back on it. But normally, most people think that I started out in media. The day I was finishing my uh, university at the Delhi School of Economics,
Right.
my professor then, who was actually iconic, her name was Dharma Kumar. She was uh, Ramanujam's grandniece, and she was a major figure in the Delhi School of Economics. And she asked me what I was going to do after the exams were over. And I had written the civil services exam. I had written the exam for entering into the SBI, into the RBI, into the insurance companies, and a whole bunch of other exams. And
Right.
by a strange twist of fortune, I had got into all of them. So I told her, ma'am, I haven't decided what I want to do. So I'm still trying to figure out. So she said, rubbish. You're going to waste your time if you're going to join, the civil services or the Reserve Bank. You and another classmate of mine, the two of you come to my house on Monday, and the exams had finished on Friday. So we thought this was very strange, and my other classmate uh, had just won the Rhodes Scholarship, and he was going to go off to Oxford, and he went off to Oxford, became the Deputy Director General of the World Trade Organization, all of that. But she believed that we were both time wasters. So she said, this is rubbish. You come to my home on Monday at 5 o'clock. So we said, all right. And we just looked at each other, and we said, fine, we'll go at 5 o'clock. So when we went 5 o'clock, we found that, she lived in this extremely uh, posh home, which was a Lutyens bungalow in, I think it was Tughlaq Crescent. And we found out that her husband, Lavraj Kumar, was the chairman of the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices. So he was a grand nephew of Lala Shriram, the original Lala Shriram, and he had been a Rhodes Scholar. He had been the head of Burma Shell in India, etc. And now he was chairman of the government body called the BICP. So she told him in the drawing room, Lavi, these boys are the brightest from the Delhi School of Economics. They're going to waste their life. Why don't you hire them from tomorrow? So he looked at her strangely and said, Dharma, for appointments in the BICP, it has to go up to the AICC, the ACC, the Appointments Committee of Cabinet.
Okay.
She said, don't be silly. I'll talk to the fellows. Dharma knew everybody in Delhi. This was truly the Lutyens Delhi of those times. So
Right.
she could talk to, and she was a eminent professor of the Delhi School of Economics. She was on the first name basis with the Manmohan Singhs and the Amartya Sens. And she also was on the first name basis with the Prime Minister. So she said, I don't understand what the problem is. You asked him to come to work from Thursday. So Lavi looked at her in a most helpless manner that most husbands look at towards their wives who have given them instructions on what to do. And he said, all right, you boys come on Thursday. I looked at my friend and my friend looked at me. And we said, we've just finished our exams on Friday, our master's exam. So maybe next week. He said, no. When I said Thursday, I mean Thursday. And thus began my professional career. Absolutely unplanned, like every other career change which happened thereafter. And I ended up in this grand building next to Khan Market called Loknayak Bhavan. Okay, just behind Khan Market, there's that in the building in which now the ED sits. So we found ourselves in that office the next day, and we also found ourselves designated economists, consulting economists. So we didn't take that title too seriously because our exam results were still to come out. So we were not sure whether we were even economists. So we worked there for a period of almost 2 years. And I must confess that at this point of time, on government expense, I also managed to get an air ticket, the first time I'd ever flown. So, flying on government expense is the ultimate in luxury when you're a schoolboy who's come out of Calcutta, come to Delhi School of Economics, had a bus pass to get to various places. Suddenly to find yourself flying when you were the last journey that I had made to Delhi before my exams. I had got off the Kalka Mail at before Old Delhi Station, and I had slid down that bridge just before Old Delhi Station. There is a bridge which crosses the ring road. That a red brick bridge which crosses the ring road, a rail bridge.
Right.
So I jumped off the train there, slid down the parapet to the ground, came down to the ring road, had taken a Mudrika, the ring road bus, the Mudrika, to get to my hostel so that I could manage to be in time for dinner. So, compared to that, having the government pay you money to fly was a major advance in our life.
Right. Interesting.
Life hasn't ever stopped getting better since then.
And then now I want to ask you to take us to how you got into the journalism world and media world.
So that was also linked to the BICP. At the Bureau of Industrial Costs and Prices, there was a senior consultant. And this senior consultant one day came to me and said, Dilip, would you like to consider a career in journalism? So I said, sure. And by this time, my colleague, Harshvardhan Singh, had already gone off to Oxford. So I was a bit orphaned in the BICP. And I said, no harm trying something else now. This consultant, he's passed away many years ago. He said, I'm going to talk to somebody and you'll have an interview next week. I found this very odd that somebody who's working in the BICP is offering me a job somewhere else. So he said that, look, I think that you will do very well in journalism because I've read some of the stuff that you write. So the next week, I got a call to land up at Sujan Singh Park. And Sujan Singh Park was the home of somebody who was again iconic in Delhi called Malvika Singh, who was then, editor of one of the magazines in India at that time called the India Magazine.
Right.
She was the daughter of somebody called Ramesh Thapar, who used to edit a magazine, and till his death he edited it, called Seminar Magazine. And Ramesh Thapar was advisor to Mrs. Indira Gandhi, and Mala Singh was his daughter. So I didn't know the address was Mala Singh's. I arrived there, and I meet Ashok Advani, who was the owner of Business India. So I thought that it was his flat. So, and she was working for him. So then a Sardarji came into the room And I asked him whether he was also working for the magazine. He said, no, I happen to own this flat. And Ashok Advani is visiting. So my interview began on the wrong note because I'd already made my first brilliant faux pas. Anyway, as things turned out, Ashok Advani said that I should start the next week. So I promptly went and resigned to Lavraj Kumar. And when Ashok Advani interviewed me, he said, this is what you will want to do, and this is what I'm planning to do in the magazine. The magazine had just started. And he said, you'll cover government and the bureaucracy. And I said, all right. I said, he said, do you need a typewriter? I said, no, I still need a stenographer. So he looked at me strangely. He said, you mean to say you can't type? He says, no, I work in the government. I always dictate my notes to the stenographer. So he said, then we'll have to deduct your salary for the salary of the stenographer. Yes, I'll let you have a stenographer because you've come very highly recommended by somebody I trust. So my salary, which was going to be 1,800 rupees, was made 1,000 rupees because they were going to pay 800 rupees to the stenographer.
Okay.
So that's how I started. And that was my move into journalism. And I had never done any journalism course. I had never done any writing except for something called the Junior Statesman, or for a letter to the editor for the Statesman in Calcutta or something. And I found myself as correspondent North India for Business India magazine, which was just a young magazine. And that's how I started my career in Business India. And I went on for the next 10 or 11 years in Business India till I became editor. And I left when I found I was repeating myself. But that was not the end of my career in journalism, but it was my end of my career in magazine journalism.
Right.
Towards the end of my 11th year or something, I got a call and was summoned to meet Dhirubhai Ambani in Bombay. So Dhirubhai said, I'm starting a newspaper. Can you be editor? So in my usual manner, I said, yeah, why not? So he said, yeah, why not? Se nahi chalega. Shuru karega ki nahi? So I said, all right, I will. So he negotiated something with me, and we started we first went out and acquired a newspaper called the Sunday Observer, which was then edited by a chap called Vinod Mehta.
Right.
And we bought the paper, and he said, now we've got a paper, we've got a title, so let's start. So I said, we have to, if you're starting a daily, there's a big difference. And he wanted to start a paper which was going to cover only politics and business. He didn't want to cover sports, arts, history, geography, theater, nothing. He said politics and business. So we called it the Observer of Business and Politics. It was called BPO, Business and Political Observer. And it took us 2 years to start the daily, but I started work the next day with him.
Interesting.
And at that time, I was reporting only to him, and the board consisted of him, Mukesh Bhai, and Anil Bhai. That's it, and me. So that was the next job in journalism.
Interesting. So how many years were you in that business of the Observer Group or Observer newspaper?
Must have been about 2.5, 3 years, 3 years plus.
Okay. And from there, you moved on to create Perfect Relations. So tell us the story of how that.
No, I didn't. Actually, I see over there again. Every single move is completely serendipitous. Dhirubhai Ambani called me because he had met Ashok Advani and asked him, "Tumhara Delhi coverage kaun karta hai?" And he told him that I have this bright guy called Dilip Cherian. And so he said, "Number mujhe dena." And Dhirubhai just called me without calling Ashok. Then I told Dhirubhai, I remember, I said, look, if Ashok Advani gives me permission, he says, uska baap mere ko permission dega. Tum kyun puchte ho? Main pooch lunga usse. So one day what happened was, I had left office in the Observer at about 1 in the morning. These were the days before cell phones.
Right.
And when I reached home on the landline, there was a call from my sub-editor, from the desk editor. He said, sir, should we carry your piece on the front page or on the third page? So I said, but I haven't written a piece. He said, no, sir, we've got a piece written by you with your byline. So he he said there's a piece by you. So I got onto my motorcycle, which is the vehicle I used to use at that time. I went back to the office and I found that there was a piece in my name which I had never written. And so I said, take it off, it's not mine. I went back, went to sleep. In the morning when I got up, the paper had come and my piece was on the front page across the top 8 columns. So I immediately took a pen and paper, and I had a fax machine in my home in those days. And I had the fax number of Dhirubhai. Dhirubhai used to have a fax machine on his breakfast table. So I wrote out a resignation letter and sent it to him on the fax. And I get a call back within about an hour from him. No, half an hour. And he called and said, after a lot of MCBC, he said, why are you quitting? I said, look, Dhirubhai, you can't be half pregnant. So you can't be half credible. This piece is not written by me. It's rubbish. So I have to resign to show that I'm credible. So I left without a job, without any idea what I was going to do. And I helped to start another newspaper which somebody else wanted to start. I got that job because a friend called me up and said, look, you're leaving Observer. Here's this guy wants to start a newspaper, etc. And then I figured out that I should do something totally different. And I decided to set up a PR company. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah, so I've read this legendary story, which is true, that how you managed to rent out a room in a former JMM MP's home in Delhi to set up your initial office and build Perfect Relations. Tell us these little nuggets. How did that happen? Why the name Perfect Relations? How did you meet your co-founder and partner at that time? Just throw some light on that as well, please.
Okay. So even while I was at the Observer, I was a kind of informal advisor to a chap called Ravi Dubey, who was the president of something called called Good Relations. And Good Relations at that time was a major PR agency in India, and I was a kind of informal advisor to him, not informal or formal advisor to Ravi Dubey. And the CEO in Delhi was a chap called Pradeep Kevalramani. So once I had quit the Observer, I was working on the other paper, etc. A former schoolmate of mine came to me and said, look, Dilip, I want to hire a PR agency, but from what I've heard, you are capable of doing such a thing. So will you do the PR for us? This former schoolmate of mine was at that point of time the chairman of Pepsi, and a legendary chap called Ramesh Mangal. So Ramesh said, Dilip, I'm sick and tired of, at that time, Burson Marsteller. And he said, look, they give me a different bill every month saying this is the time spent and this is the man hours spent and all that. And I can't argue the bill every month with headquarters. So can you give me a fixed fee kind of option? So I said, Ramesh, are you serious? So he said, yeah, why don't you, you can do anything. He knew a little bit about my backstory because the school groups had talked about it and there was a chatter about my journey from, from BICP to Nariman Point. And I said, okay. So I said, what is it you want? He said, no, I just want somebody to deliver PR services to Pepsi. So I said, will you sign a contract? He said, yeah, the moment you have a company, I'll sign a contract. So I said, let me ask Pradeep Kevalramani and let's ask him whether he'd like to create a company with me. So I went to him and since I was going to Good Relations anyway, and I said, do you want to start a company? He said, with what? I said, with nothing, but we'll go 50-50. So he said, all right. So I asked a friend of mine, I said, I may need an office from tomorrow. So he said, मेरा एक दोस्त है, उसका drawing room तुम use कर लो. I said, sure. And we went to meet Shibu Soren. And Shibu Soren said, हाँ, कमरा है, तुम ले लो. So we paid him some princely sum of, I think, 150 or 250 rupees for the use of his drawing room. The only nigger in this wood pile was that Shibu Soren would have to go through out of his bedroom, walk past the drawing room or the living room as it's called, and go to the kitchen to order the house staff what he wanted. So we had tables and chairs, and we rented something from some kabadi bazaar and put together a semi office which also looked like a drawing room, and we had a separate entrance to the drawing room from one side of the house, like these old um, you know MP bungalows used to
Right.
do. And we started perfect relations. I had a bike. I think Bobby didn't. I think Bobby had no. Bobby didn't have a bike. So we used to go up to this. In those days, there were these telephone boxes in Delhi. So we used to go and make our calls from the telephone box there because we couldn't use the house phone there. And
Right.
then Bobby would come back, or Pradeep would come back and get onto my bike and go off to Bahadur Shah Zafar Marg to put out press releases. And that's how perfect relations started.
No, thanks for the story. So did you have to hire an employee or two initially, or just Pradeep and you, Pradeep, who's otherwise known as Bobby, and you manage it, or did you have an employee or a staff to help you in the initial days?
We had, one or two people, and we hired maybe one or two people, just random folks from out of the blue. And I had a rule that we wouldn't hire either people with PR experience or people with media experience. We hired just people who we thought were smart, and that's a rule I've persisted with for many years into my running of perfect relations. Now, of course, HR departments have taken over all those tasks from me, and they look for previous PR experience, training in communications skills, and all of that. Because I had become a consultant to government without any previous experience in government, because I'd become um, a journalist without any previous experience in journalism, I figured out that the best of my colleagues in each of these professions were people who had never qualified to be where they were and had qualified to do something else. Architects.
Right.
One
Right.
guy had come back after a trip to Ladakh, and that was his qualification, and I hired him, I remember. And it worked very well. It worked brilliantly for us.
Interesting. I'm now going to move. I mean, this history is important for people who have been watchers of the Indian public relations space in your company. And then we know a few years back, finally, your company got acquired or merged with Dentsu, and we know that story. But I'll hold on to that. The question we ask pioneers in Indian PR on campaigns. I have two questions. The first is, among the hundreds and thousands of campaigns you've worked on in the last 30, 40 years, what's the one campaign that you hold dear or you feel you're happy to talk of as the campaign that you still feel proud of having worked on or created sometime in the course of your building the company?
Because my long-term memory is kind of feeble, I'm going to have to use an example of a recent one.
Right.
One of the things that we did in recent years was a massive campaign for TikTok about a year before they were banned in India. Um, we were responsible for um, handling the change of TikTok's image, not just here but in other parts of Asia also, from being what we call a time pass um, app and a vehicle for just humorous songs, gags, gigs, etc. So they found that was a problem with them, and it was the problem was not so much about from the user side, but from the people who they were looking at for advertising, from the government, from the regulators, from police, etc. So um, the the task given to us was to find a, a, a communication segue into positioning them differently to make them acceptable in this part of the world, India, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., etc. So we spent a lot of creative time internally brainstorming on this, and it was a difficult one because you know, people were committing suicide on TikTok, people were doing bullying on TikTok, people were doing nudity on TikTok, everything was happening on TikTok. And I remember that the young Chinese creator of TikTok um, came to India to have a chat with me. And uh, I, of course, um, I have this rather, shall I say, um, mm, slightly Luddite kind of approach to people. I My rule is that when I'm meeting a person, I don't Google them and I don't want to know too much about them or have anyone give me a briefing note on them. So the head of policy for TikTok, an amazingly brilliant woman, had come down from Shanghai to make sure that, you know, the meeting was set up between me and this guy who was the founder. I forget his name and I can't pronounce it in Chinese. So she had told me lots of things, and when he came, I'd forgotten her briefing, and I didn't even realize that she said, "I want you to meet a colleague for lunch." So she come down to India and she said, "I want you to meet a colleague for lunch." Turned out to be the owner. She hadn't told me. I thought some colleague of hers. So here I was expanding on what, TikTok, the problems, regulators, India, time waste, time pass, concept of time pass, etc. And then he said, so his English was not the world's best. He was a geek, and he looked like a Chinese geek. And he said, so whatever her name was tells me that you have all the ideas. So I said, and I was focused on the lunch because I was trying to eat, and he was trying to uh, what is called brain tag me. So
Right.
I said, look, if you really want to change the thing, we need to make this TikTok thing part of what I call the creator economy. And let's show how TikTok is a means of livelihood for many people. And something clicked in him. He said, yes, I think that you have something there. So let's look at how revenue monetization can be a thing for people who are great creators on TikTok.
Right.
And today, I'm talking about now 5 years ago, TikTok dominates the creator economy. I'm not saying
Right.
I'm responsible for that, but
Right.
my job was only to provide him a segue from time pass to cash pass. Cash pass meaning cash pass law. So
Right.
I was able to explain this to him, and I think he took that away because he had a furiously bright mind. And in the 1.5 hours that we had lunch, I remember that he was absorbing more than he does not take any notes. And I found, because this is one of the things that I do, if I go in for a session like this, I don't do any notes. I'll be honest. I didn't even really look through all the questions with any great thing, because I think there's something which you add to a
Yeah.
session like this if you add spontaneity.
Absolutely.
If you are rehearsed, then it may sound much more picture perfect. But I
Absolutely.
think that humans relate
Yeah.
better to serendipity. And
No,
serendipity
absolutely.
is the secret of all of this.
Yes. I'm going to now digress a little bit. Everybody knows that you have roots in Kerala, but you've lived most of your adult life in Delhi. But you had your few formative years in Calcutta, or Kolkata as they call it now. Tell us about how that happened. How did you land up in Calcutta? What was the history behind you being a Calcutta boy?
The history behind it is that my father moved to Bombay because he was a medical engineer. And from Bombay, he moved to Calcutta to work. And when he got married, he was in Calcutta. And so, as soon as he got married, he and my mother came to Calcutta, and they lived there all their lives. In fact, my mother still has a home there. Though at the moment she's not living there because of COVID. She's living overseas with my sister. But Calcutta is where I went to school, where I went to college,
Right.
and it is really, if I were to have the choice of anywhere in the world to live, and I didn't have to worry about an income stream, I would live in Calcutta all over again. So it's the city
Interesting.
of my dreams, and I firmly believe that Calcutta has taught me a lot about people, about human interactions. Calcutta is the only city that I know where at a party you are never asked where you live or what you do. They want to hear what you think, and they want to hear your stories. And
Right.
Calcutta is is a is a really special place because human beings have human connections there. They don't slot you by whether you live in Jamuna Par or whether you live in South Delhi or whether you are a Gurgaon person.
Right. No, fascinating to know that, and thanks for sharing those important gems of wisdom as well. We're
So I
coming
was
to the
born in Kerala. Let's be very clear. I was born in Kerala, but before further damage could happen to me, I was taken to Calcutta. But my parents, don't think realized in those days that Calcutta was also going to be communist, just as Kerala was. And when I joined college, and I was part of the anti-Naxalite, anti-Congress movement, and
wow.
I cleared a new path in presidency colleges politics and created a new set of people who neither believed in the left nor the right.
Interesting. Which city in Kerala were you born in?
A place called Adur, where the famous movie maker Adul Gopalakrishnan comes from.
Okay. Right. Right. Good to know that. Let's now understand what does Dilip Cherian do beyond work. How do you spend some time to unwind and leisure and for your leisure beyond your many hours you put in day and week on a weekly basis into work?
For the last 10 to 15 years, I've spent a certain portion of my time teaching. That's one part. I enjoy teaching, but I have a rule on teaching. I never, I will never grade answer papers. I will set the exam questions, but I'm not going to grade it. I don't have the time to read not so bright answers from the majority of students just for the really bright 5 people who will have
Right.
exceptional answers. It's not my cup of tea. The second thing I've been doing during the first .com boom and now is that I have always spent a certain portion of my time mentoring the founders of startups. So I pick and choose. I get a lot of requests. I have an inbox which reasonably has a high pressure on my time, but I will pick and choose a few founders to whom I give mentorship, and I do that very selectively, but I do that regularly. So these are the two things I spend my time on, and besides the usual things of family and dogs, and I have 4 grandchildren. So I have a fairly packed personal life, but I
Right.
also make sure that I spend a lot of time meeting with friends. And my friends
Right.
come from all kinds of levels of society. So some people think that because of my social image, I'm seen with the good and the great. I have good friends among the good and the great, but I have equally unsung friends from among the lowly and the absurdly well connected at the bottom of the heap. So
Right.
I spend a lot of time with friends.
No, interesting. Good to know that. As we come to the end of the main part of the interview and get ready for a quick rapid fire round, my last couple of questions. Last penultimate question. A lot of youngsters are every year aspiring to get into public relations. Some of them have no clue what it is. They think it's a glamorous world. Some of them think that they want to be in it because it's a job that entails different things on different days. What's your message to a 21-year-old who wants to get into PR? What should he or she keep in mind before they embark upon a career in public relations?
In one line, go and do a real job, whether it is selling pharmaceuticals, uh, running trekking groups, being a store manager. Go and do a real job which has nothing to do with PR. Spend a few years understanding any two domains. It doesn't matter what the domains are. As I said, the domain can be, uh, you know, working in, say, the slums as an NGO. It can be anything. But spend 2 years after your postgrad or your grad, after you studied PR, if if you manage to get into Amit's courses, all of that. But spend 2 years doing what I call a real job. If
Okay.
you want to get into PR, that is the best preparation that you can have.
Interesting. The question is youngsters will have is isn't PR a real job too? But I know what you're saying. A real job beyond PR and then
You
coming
know,
to PR.
when I was assistant editor of Business India, I received an Indian letter from my father, which said, "When will you get yourself a real job?" I showed that to my publisher, Ashok Advani. He almost cried. He says, "Dilip, you are the youngest editor of the country's largest business magazine. At that time, it was the largest business magazine. And your father is asking you this question. I must meet him." So I said, "Sure. When he comes to Delhi next time, I'll get you to meet him." And
Right.
I remember it was not funny because Ashok Advani's father, who was one of the biggest lawyers of Bombay, and Ashok was also a lawyer. And Ashok Advani's father was lawyer to the Hindujas, the Chabrias, the Motwanis, the Milwanis. He was the
Got it.
don of all Sindhi law firms. He was the don, Ashok Advani's
Interesting.
father. Okay.
Right.
So I remember Ashok Advani's father once asked me while Ashok was sitting, saying, "When will this guy give up this magazine thing and do a real legal job?" So,
Right.
so it was almost like karma coming back.
Right. Then you have hundreds and thousands of stories to tell from your journalism days, from your pre-journalism days, from your PR days. Would you ever consider writing a book in the months or years to come, or that's something you will not do because there are too many secrets to be kept for a long, long time to come?
I will not be able to do work if I were to write a book on PR. But yes, I am writing a book which has been in the pipeline for 10 years. It's on bureaucracy. And every time I sit down to work on it, the nature of the bureaucracy changes yet again. Just now,
Right.
Modi has changed the bureaucracy all over again. So I'm having to rewrite a couple of chapters. So I hope
Right.
I'm able to do that soon. And that book is in the works.
But I'm sure you can write an autobiography and keep it and tell your family and children maybe to publish it after you have stopped working or retired in the future. And that's an option to consider as well because so much one can learn from your many years of interesting connections and work that you've done in multiple fields and facets.
Thank you.
Yeah. So with that, the last question before we do the rapid fire: what do you see, or how do you see PR as a profession, as a career choice, as an occupation that many people are in part of, evolving in the next 3 to 4 years? Things are changing rapidly at every level. The pandemic has hit us bad, but how do you see PR evolving if it does in the next 3 to 4 years?
That's a terrific question, Amit. Very perceptive. Um, I think that PR is going to go in two interesting directions, and people who are skilled at PR will need to move in two directions. One is something that does not change and is a perennial, which is the art of engaging people with a story that goes back to the development of fire. Storytelling is a human need, and being able to tell a story is a PR skill. That's one. But the second skill is brand new and for the future: data analytics. Those who don't know how to work with algorithms which give them, um, in a sense, moodometers, understand how the mood of the public is changing almost in real time, and understand what goes into those algos. People who don't know how to actually work, manipulate, take the results, push it back into their work, etc. There is a technical side to it. For the first time, I think PR will need people who have an understanding of technology, the technology of measurement, the technology of reading and responding to the nuances of change. I think those who don't understand that are not going to be able to manage PR in the way that they think they can.
Interesting. Thanks for that. It was a pleasure talking to you. I wish we can have multiple episodes with people like you who have so much to share, so much to tell, so much work behind you over the last many years. But we have to end it here. But before we end, we'll spend 100 seconds with 10 quick questions in a rapid fire round, just to get a little glimpse of you beyond what the world knows you as. So if you're ready, we'll just dive in and have this quick 10 questions. We have 5 to 7 seconds per question, and we'll hear you out. Let's start. What's the brand you trust the most?
I would say at the moment it is Android.
Okay. Which is the one book you will recommend highly to anybody you come across that they should read? At least one book that one should definitely read.
I have a different book every year. For this year, the book is called The Entangled Web by a gentleman called Merlin Sheldrake.
Okay.
The entire book is about fungi and the role of fungi in the world.
Interesting.
So it's the most interesting and amazing book. The other day, my wife saw the book. It's a hardcover book, and of the 500 pages in the book, I must have underlined about 350 pages. It's so brilliant.
I see. Tell us
Yeah.
your favorite Indian communicator. Who's your one favorite Indian communicator of any kind?
I really think that the greatest communicator that I had encountered was Dhirubhai Ambani.
Okay.
And he was mesmerizing, absolutely mesmerizing. When he communicated to shareholders, they would buy anything that he wanted them to do. He could tell them anything and they would just accept it unquestioningly.
Right. Which is your favorite holiday destination? One place you love to go back to again and again, or want to go back to after many years when things
Sri
settle
Lanka.
down?
Sri Lanka,
Okay.
anywhere.
Okay. The last two. How does Dilip Cherian himself describe Dilip Cherian in 3 words?
Really irritating guy.
Are you? I don't think you are. And the last one. What is your one big learning of the last 15, 16 months that we have all gone through together in this world? One big learning from that.
You can learn anything, anywhere. I was a guy used to working with a minimum of 3 secretaries who used to man my office around the clock almost. And I discovered I don't need any of them.
Okay. Thank you so much. That was indeed Dilip Cherian talking to us about hundreds of stories all put together in less than an hour. I'm sure there is scope for someone to create a documentary on the life and times of this gentleman. Thank you so much, sir. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I hope you enjoyed doing this as much as I did. We look
Thank you very
forward
much.
to
I
meeting in
enjoyed it
person.
and I look forward to this. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.